Could one bullet really hit two men? At first, that sounds impossible, and for more than 60 years, millions of people have believed exactly that. They call it the magic bullet. According to the official investigation, a single bullet entered President John F. Kennedy's upper back, then passed through his neck, then struck Governor John Connally, breaking a rib and shattering his wrist, and finally coming to rest in his thigh. For many people, that doesn't sound like physics. It sounds like fiction. But that's not the only reason this bullet became so controversial. Kennedy and Connally appeared to be sitting one behind the other. Yet the bullet seems to leave Kennedy through the neck, only to strike Connally much lower in the back. At first glance, it almost looks as if the bullet suddenly changed direction in mid-air. And that's exactly why millions of people have questioned the official explanation. Now, before we go any further, I want to make one thing clear. This video is not an investigation into who killed President Kennedy. We're not trying to prove or disprove a conspiracy. The assassination of JFK is one of the most debated events in modern history, and there are countless questions surrounding it. And maybe one day I'll investigate them too. But today, we're focusing on just one bullet. Because if this bullet really couldn't have done what investigators claimed, then one of the most important conclusions of the official investigation becomes much harder to defend. But if it could, then perhaps one of the most famous arguments for a conspiracy isn't as strong as many people believe. So, is the magic bullet really impossible? Or have millions of people been repeating the same story without ever looking closely at the evidence? Imagine you're standing in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. President Kennedy's limousine is moving through the plaza. Lee Harvey Oswald is looking down from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. A shot is fired. According to the official investigation, that bullet first strikes President Kennedy. It enters his upper back, travels through his neck, continues forward, and then strikes Governor John Connally, who is sitting in front of him. This is where many people stop. Because if Connally was sitting directly in front of Kennedy, how could a bullet leave Kennedy's neck and hit Connally much lower in the back? Is it even possible? It seems as Kennedy and Connally were sitting in identical seats, directly one behind the other, at exactly the same height. If that were true, the bullet's path would look very strange indeed. So, before we follow the bullet, let's take a closer look at the limousine itself. The first surprise? Governor Connally wasn't sitting directly in front of President Kennedy. He was sitting on a separate jump seat, and those seats weren't mounted in the same position as the rear seat. They were placed slightly inward and toward the center of the limousine. But even more importantly, they were lower, not by a huge amount, but enough to completely change the geometry. Suddenly, the bullet no longer has to make a sharp turn downward, because Connally's back wasn't at the same height as Kennedy's neck. It was lower, and slightly to the left. That's a detail many illustrations completely ignore, or simply never show. Now, does that automatically prove the official explanation? Not at all. So, we've already learned something important. The limousine wasn't arranged the way most people imagine it. Governor Connally wasn't sitting directly in front of President Kennedy. His seat was lower and slightly toward the center of the car. But that still doesn't answer our question. Could one bullet really pass through both men? There's only one way to find out. Let's start drawing. The shooter's position: President Kennedy, Governor Connally, and one bullet. Now let's place them exactly where they were. The rifle wasn't fired from street level. It came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That means the bullet wasn't traveling perfectly horizontal. It was traveling downward. Now let's add Connally, but where he was actually sitting: lower, slightly inward, turned a little to his right. Now, draw one straight line. Don't bend it. Don't curve it. Don't force it to fit. Just connect the rifle to Kennedy and continue the same line forward. Something interesting starts to happen. The line doesn't suddenly turn. It doesn't zigzag. It doesn't bounce. It simply continues forward. At least that's what the geometry suggests. But geometry alone isn't enough. Because even if the path looks possible, there's another question we still need to answer. Could a single bullet actually pass through two people and still have enough energy to keep going? At this point, the magic bullet doesn't seem quite as magical anymore. But that doesn't mean we've solved the mystery, because there's another question. Could one bullet really pass through President Kennedy, then continue into Governor Connally, breaking a rib, shattering his wrist, and still have enough energy to do all of that? That sounds like a lot. And honestly, when I first looked at the list of injuries, I thought exactly the same thing. One bullet? Really? So, let's break it down. The bullet fired that day wasn't a handgun bullet. It came from a 6.5 by 52 millimeter Connally rifle, a military rifle, designed to travel at extremely high speed. At the moment it left the barrel, it was carrying far more energy than most people imagine. But bullets lose energy every time they pass through something. So, the real question isn't, could it hit two men? The real question is, how much energy would it still have left after passing through the first one? To answer that, we need to look at what the bullet actually passed through. In President Kennedy, the bullet passed through soft tissue in the upper back and neck. It did not strike the spine. It did not shatter major bones. That detail matters, because it means the bullet lost much less energy than many people assume. And when it reached Governor Connally, it still had enough velocity to cause serious injuries. But was it enough to explain all of them? That's where the forensic evidence becomes far more interesting than the theories. So far, we've looked at two questions. First, could the trajectory work? And second, could the bullet still have enough energy to keep going? But there's one more problem. And for many people, this is the most suspicious part of the entire story: the bullet itself. Because when people hear what this bullet supposedly did, they expect the bullet to look destroyed, flattened, twisted, broken apart. Something that looks like it went through a violent collision. But the bullet recovered after the assassination looked surprisingly intact. Not perfect, not untouched, but much more intact than many people expect. And that's where the argument begins, because to a lot of people that image seems impossible. How could one bullet cause so many injuries and still look like that? I understand that reaction. They hear one bullet hit two men. They hear one bullet caused 7 wounds. They see a bullet that looks too intact, and they conclude it couldn't have happened. But the real question is more specific. Did this particular bullet, from this particular rifle, traveling along this particular path, through these particular parts of the body have to be destroyed? Or could it have survived in roughly the condition we see? That's what we need to look at next. Almost everyone has seen the photograph of the bullet. Far fewer people have actually read what the forensic experts said about it. Those aren't the same thing, because photographs can be misleading, especially when we already expect to see something impossible. Let's start with something simple. This is what the cartridge looked like before the shot. The bullet is only the front part. That's the only part that actually leaves the rifle. At first glance, it looks almost perfectly smooth. A rounded nose, an intact copper jacket, no dents, no missing pieces. Exactly what you'd expect from a brand new cartridge. Now, let's compare that to the bullet recovered after the assassination. At first, it still looks surprisingly intact, and that's exactly why so many people call it the magic bullet. But look a little closer. Its base is no longer perfectly round. Part of the metal jacket has been damaged. It means the bullet we see today isn't the same bullet that left the rifle. Now, does that automatically prove the official explanation? No. But it does challenge one of the most common claims. The claim that the bullet was completely untouched. It wasn't. The real question isn't whether it was damaged. It clearly was. The real question is whether it was damaged enough. And that's where ballistics becomes surprisingly complicated, because bullets don't all deform in the same way. Their construction matters. Their speed matters. What they strike matters. The angle of impact matters. Even the order in which they strike different materials matters. That's why looking at a single photograph without understanding the bullet itself can be misleading. The bigger question was whether a single bullet could actually produce all of those injuries and still survive. Over the years, that question has been examined by forensic pathologists, ballistic experts, and independent investigators. Their conclusion wasn't that the single bullet theory had been proven beyond all possible doubt. Science rarely works that way, but based on the available evidence, most concluded that the injuries were consistent with a single bullet following that path. Not certain, not impossible, simply possible. For more than 60 years, people have heard the phrase magic bullet, and many have accepted that it describes something impossible. But after looking at the evidence, the limousine, the trajectory, the ballistics, and the medical reports, I don't think the word magic really belongs here. Does that prove the official explanation beyond all doubt? No. There are still many unanswered questions surrounding President Kennedy's assassination, and perhaps we'll explore some of them in future videos. But this particular claim, that one bullet couldn't possibly have struck both men, turns out to be far less certain than I expected. And that's exactly why I enjoy making videos like this. Not to defend an official story, and not to promote a conspiracy theory. Next time you hear a story that everyone knows, it might be worth asking one more question. What does the evidence actually say?